This is Tatsuki Fujimoto. He's an eccentric fellow. Fujimoto is also known for allegedly being a masochist, having eaten his dead pet goldfish, has role-played as his own fictional 8-year-old younger sister on Twitter, and for a time supposedly pretended to be Filipino. But that's not what you probably know Fujimoto for. No, you probably know him from the manga Chainsaw Man, or maybe even his first published serialized comic, Fire Punch. Both of these mangas are nothing short of crazy, violent, over the top, exaggerated, downright silly many times, and very creatively conveyed in ways only Fujimoto can. Fujimoto is all of this, but Look Back is all Fujimoto. Look Back is a manga short story that was published on Shueisha's Shonen Jump Plus in July 2021. As opposed to Fujimoto's other works, Look Back is a very down-to-earth story. There are no demons, no explosions, no chopped off heads, and no chainsaws. This would probably normally be the point in the video where I told you about the amazing reception the manga had, but honestly, people just praised it for being good. A bunch of 7s and praised like a great opportunity for Fujimoto to show off his skills. So, why do I suddenly want to talk about this? I mean, my other videos have been about media that have been praised for being some of the best in their respective fields, and Look Back kind of pales in popularity compared to Chainsaw Man. Well, I want to do that because if you are a creator of any kind, especially an artist, you will not read a more poignant manga about the beauty and struggles of creating. This is Look Back. Before we begin, it's important to stress something right out of the gate. Look Back is a very personal story. While Fujimoto does not appear himself in the comic, we can safely assume he's drawing on multiple personal experiences. And he kinda tells us that right out of the gate with the comic's two protagonists, Fujino and Kiyomoto, who, in case it wasn't obvious, spell out Fujimoto. We even know that is the order to read it, as Fujino is the foreground artist and Kiyomoto is the background artist. There are also tie-ins to real-life events, such as the comic's main characters are born around the same time Fujimoto was, and more stuff that we'll get into later. When the comic begins, the teacher says that the week's school newspaper is here and hands it out to the kids in his class. However, it seems the class is more focused on some funny art, as that's all we see them comment on. When we see the illustration in question, we don't even get to see the newspaper articles next to it in full. We do get to see that the text is there, but it's cut off, thus telling us that while it exists, the focus for everyone is the comic in question. Had the stuff around the comic simply not been there, we wouldn't get the same impression that we were focusing on the comic within the newspaper. We'd just see the comic, so we had a better understanding of what the children reacted to. We finally see the creator of the comic, along with getting her name, Fujino. We know her classmates' adoration for the comic is genuine, as proven by what we just covered, and Fujino seems to know and relish this fact. She even hypes herself up more by humble bragging how little time it took for her to make the comic. The way she holds the paper even shows how lackadaisical she thinks of it all. She really seems to enjoy stating how little she had to work to make something people love this much. Fujino's classmates says that Fujino could become a professional manga artist, and we see how that idea doesn't really appeal to Fujino. In fact, she'd much rather be a professional athlete, the polar opposite of being a mangaka, a person who creates manga. The talk gets interrupted by her class teacher, however, as she's asked to come to the faculty room. Here, the teacher asks Fujino to let a truant student, who can't come to school, Kyomoto, get one of Fujino's manga slots in the newspaper. Fujino hand-waves the proposition, saying it's not a big deal to her, but questions how someone who is too scared to come to school can dedicate themselves to art and making manga, because it's hard work after all. From just this small interaction, we already know a lot of vital things about Fujino. She likes the attention and adoration she gets from her drawings. Her having no real aspirations of becoming a mangaka tells us that she has no real interest in creating anything big or substantial. That whole concept sounds boring to her. She just likes the compliments and adoration she gets from her quick, silly comics. We can tell with how she'll say that she can make a successful manga in 5 minutes, but question how this new student Kyomoto is possibly gonna handle it, cause it's actually a lot of work. Fujino is in other words trivializing the job when she's doing it, but emphasizing the difficulty when it comes to others, thinking herself as a naturally gifted genius when it comes to manga. The next time the school paper is handed out, Fujino is ready for her usual round of compliments as seen by her confident smile. But what she sees startles her. While her comic tells a funny joke, the art is absolutely terrible compared to the art next to hers. Kyomoto's art illustrates a school beautifully while the sun is setting. It's important to note that Kyomoto's art does not feature any people, only beautiful illustrations of the school. But this stark contrast in art shocks Fujino, and it also grabs the attention of her classmates, who compliments Kyomoto's art, and now that they finally have something to compare Fujino's art to, even comments how Fujino's art leaves a lot to be desired. The way the page is framed even helps giving us the same mindset as the students by placing the two strips immediately next to each other, making it far easier to compare. In fact, comparing this strip with Fujino's prior strip, the art looks even less detailed than before, to the point where it can even be hard to tell what is going on. On her way home from class, a defeated Fujino is thinking back to all the compliments she's gotten on her art skills. But we can tell by how big the frame is that her classmates' criticism weighs way heavier on her mind and takes up way more space than the compliments she's gotten. When looking at a farmer planting stuff, she compares her own situation to Kyomoto. While Fujino is walking home from school, the farmer is still working. And in the same way, when Fujino's at school, Kyomoto is drawing. This lights a fire in Fujino. She refuses to let anyone else be better at art than her. We've seen how Fujino relishes in the respect and adoration she got from being good at art, and she's now feeling that Kyomoto's skill are threatening her place. Now Kyomoto is gonna be complimented instead of her. Now Kyomoto is gonna be respected. She can't let this happen. Fujino immediately gets to work. She googles how to become better at art. She buys art books and sketchbooks. She looks up shortcuts to improving art. Fujino is finally taking art seriously, and you just gotta hand it to Fujimoto how perfectly he encapsulates this feeling and approach that many artists are sure to have had. We then get the sequence that Look Back is probably the most famous for, and for good reason. We are treated to a series of frames of Fujino slumped over her desk as she practices her art as the world around her changes. Due to Fujino's position and posture being the same, we connect this pose to her working hard at drawing, and because it is unchanging, it allows us to focus more on the background. We see her drawing at home during the day. We see her drawing in class. We see her drawing at night. We see her drawing during recess, which we can see is the case with how the students are moving around. We see her drawing in the library, at the dinner table, while her family is watching TV, out on a bench during the summer heat as shown by her bare legs and tank top. We see her investing in more and more art books. The next sequence is shots of Fujino in her room. Now that not even her location changes, we are paying even more attention to the small changes in the room. Thus, we pay more attention to the world outside the window changing seasons. We see how her desk becomes busier with notes and post-its. Her shelf gets filled with more books, and the empty shelf for sketchbooks gets filled up with more and more filled sketchbooks. A neat detail I liked is that in the last frame, we can even see her trash can has been filled with paper, showing how Fujino is becoming more critical of her work. Safe to say, Fujino is putting her heart, soul, and all her time into improving her art. It's to the point where her classmates are noticing it and are criticizing her for it. She doesn't even let herself hang out with her friends, and when she does, she is distracted and drawing as well. The way the classmate is framed with Fujino helps, showing that the classmate is literally and metaphorically looking down on Fujino. She thinks drawing in middle school is gonna make Fujino appear like a creepy otaku, a nerd. At home, things are not much better. The family is worrying about Fujino always being holed up in her room, and it's hinted at that Fujino's even neglecting her schoolwork in favor of drawing, causing her test scores to drop. Her sister even tries to invite Fujino to join her karate classes to get her out more, but Fujino is not interested. The sister leaves Fujino alone, closing the door, leaving her alone with her yonkama. I guess I should clarify, this type of manga consisting of 4 panels is called a yonkama manga, or a 4-koma, and literally translate to 4-cell manga. It's just important that you become familiar with this word going forward, as it's what Fujino and Kiyomoto have been using to make their mangas for the school paper, and it will continue to be a visual theme going forward. Some days later, the school paper is being handed out yet again. This time, rather than seeming excited and smug when receiving it, Fujino just looks tired as she looks at the comic. In the paper are the usual setup with Fujino's comic on the left and Kiyomoto's on the right. And while we can definitely see a massive improvement in Fujino's art, it's nowhere close to the level of Kiyomoto. And because of that, without sadness or anger, Fujino announces that she simply gives up. This is a feeling I'm sure a lot of people who pursued any passion are familiar with. Pursuing someone they think is better than themselves, but no matter how much work they put into it, they just can't seem to get better than that person. And perhaps because this is such a common feeling, an experience a lot of people are intimately familiar with, is being treated very realistically. There's no exaggerated screams, no big announcement, no breaking down and crying, just a tired, dejected, I give up. The framing is even highlighting Fujino's decision. Up to this point, every single instance where Fujino's been shown together with her classmates, she's been highlighted to stand out in the same sense that Fujino probably felt. She wasn't like these other people. She was better. She was a great artist, and these guys weren't. But now that she's given up on her pursuit of art, she realizes she's just like them. She's bad at art, just like they are. As if to emphasize this moment of self-realization that she's just like the rest, she immediately asks her friend who chewed her out prior to hang out. We see another montage of Fujino socializing more, We don't even see the Beck we've come to associate with her working hard on art. Art's just nowhere in her life anymore. She's focusing on hanging out with her friends and family and doing karate. Heck, when she sees her stack of sketchbooks, she asks her mom to throw them out too, indicating that all her other art supplies have shared the same fate. But it's important to note that a single scrap of paper used for Yonkoma escapes the stack, which becomes important later.
Segments. Generally, if I drew the head over here, for an adult in this case, we will have one head and the rest of the body would just be like anywhere from 6 to 8 more heads. In some cases, 6.5 or 7.5. It's really up to you, but whatever you choose, try to be as consistent as possible. One quick tip is when I'm drawing the head, let's say you're starting from here, so this is like the first one, and then second, and third, you get the hang of it. When I put the head together, I have a simple oval shape here. I always like to think of just the skeleton of the body, so that I'm just thinking of the pose, and I'm not really focused on like the flesh or muscles or anything of that nature. Torso kind of be here. With a female, we're gonna kind of put the whole hourglass thing. Again, in future videos, we can explore other body parts. Here are the traditional basic things. The best to start with. Even when we're playing with families, we might as well just put it for the that's gonna be and in the upper area, the sense of put in like the torso. Note to self that even in real life, human beings, the bodies are different. Not all females have the same hip structure.
It's graduation day. Once more, Fujino's been called to the faculty room. Even though Kyomoto's name has not been brought up a whole lot in the comic, we know this concerns her, as we have come to associate the faculty room with her. The teacher asked Fujino to bring Kyomoto her graduation certificate. His reasoning being that Kyomoto would probably much rather get the certificate from Fujino than him, seeing Fujino and Kyomoto used to make comic strips for the school newspaper together. Fujino protests, but eventually gives in. Fujino goes to Kyomoto's house, but no one seems to be home. Hearing a sound from inside, Fujino moves further into the unlocked house before she is met with a hallway filled with sketchbooks. We know these are sketchbooks because their characteristic design was shown on Fujino's own sketchbook. And while she may have had a big stack before, Kyomoto has an entire hallway made out of these stacks. This is contrasted by the frame next to it of Fujino standing in a gradient void, completely without any art supplies in sight. While she had given up on art, Kyomoto had apparently continued diligently. Moving through the stacks of sketchbooks, Fujino eventually spots a blank Yonkoma. Fujino grabs a pencil and draws on the Yonkoma. Two things here. This sequence here shows Fujimoto doing something not a lot of mangakas do. He allows a ton of frames happen when no one is saying anything, where there's no onomatopoeia. He simply lets the character's actions and framing speak for itself. He's done this multiple times already in Look Back alone, but here it really feels poignant. The second thing is looking at the Yonkoma that Fujino draws. This is what I meant when you could have just shown the Yonkoma before without showing the newspaper text around it, but Fujimoto specifically didn't do that. Here, the context in which the Yonkoma exists in doesn't matter, so we are only shown the Yonkoma, whereas before it was important to note that people were focused on the Yonkoma and not the text around it. The Yonkoma that Fujino draws consists of two groups cheering at Fujino's room door. One group cheers for her to not come out, the other for her to come out. It's apparently a world championship to find who's the best shot in, and Kyomoto is winning by a lot, only to reveal that inside, Kyomoto is actually dead. It's a rather mocking comic, showing that Fujino is still bearing a grudge of Kyomoto leaving her in the dust. After drawing, Fujino looks at the comic, asking herself what she's doing. Without thinking about it, she just started drawing. It came natural to her. There's also something I enjoy about the comic, being that you can tell there's no sketch work, which we've seen Fujino use before in her comics, and despite that, the comic is easily understood. While she may have given up on art, the core skill is still there. As Fujino ponders her actions, she accidentally drops a Yonkoma that slips under Kyomoto's door. Embarrassed, she rushes out of the house. We then see a first-person view from Kyomoto. We can tell it's first-person with the angles. As she runs, we see she's practicing and working her way up to exclaim Fujino-sensei, which she does when she finally bursts out of her house, stopping Fujino in her tracks. Kyomoto clearly struggles with her words. As she makes her way closer to Fujino, we see hers and Fujino's legs, reflecting how Kyomoto is probably avoiding eye contact due to shyness. When she finally musters up the courage to talk, she announces that she's read the school newspaper ever since the first year and that she's a fan of Fujino and asks for her autograph. Fujino remains stoic and stone-faced, but agrees to sign Kyomoto's back. As she does, Kyomoto gushes about her favorite comics, knowing them by name and when they were published, calling Fujino's work godlike. She talks about how she couldn't finish her strips in time sometimes, but is impressed that Fujino could while still going to school. She finishes off with, "It was so amazing. I was like, is she really in the same grade as me?" This is a stark contrast to how Fujino reacted to Kyomoto's art. Kyomoto wanted to be as good and consistent as Fujino, while Fujino didn't want to let someone else be better than her. No matter their reasons, they both admired each other's work and wished to become better. Kyomoto even notes that she noticed that Fujino's art and stories started rapidly improving at one point and calls her a manga genius. This makes Fujino, who was before stone-faced, look sad and dejected. Perhaps due to thinking back to all the work she's put in without seeing any big improvements, or because she feels guilty for having stopped making art for someone who looked up to her so much. It's also important to note that due to Kyomoto's posture, she's constantly lowered herself, thus making the shots of Fujino slightly panned up, so we look up at Fujino, showing the pedestal that Kyomoto puts her on. However, the instant Kyomoto asks Fujino why she stopped making manga, the camera pans down on Fujino, showing how she feels small and ashamed. Perhaps as an extension of this, when Kyomoto asks her why she stopped making art, Fujino lies and says it's because she's working to submit a story for a manga award and wished to focus on that. Ecstatic about this revelation, Kyomoto begs to see the comic, to which Fujino replies that she guesses she can show Kyomoto when the comic is done. As it starts raining, Fujino heads home and we see Kyomoto staying out in the rain waving goodbye to Fujino despite the rain. As she walks, while maintaining a composed look on her face, her body betrays her excitement from being cheered on by Kyomoto as she starts walking more animated to straight up dancing and flamboyant moves, all while the rain picks up. She doesn't care about the rain, she's just too excited about the girl whom she thought looked down on her actually looks up to her. Arriving home, the raindrops revealed that the instant Fujino came home, she kicked off her shoes and ran straight to her room to start working on art. We can even see the still wet rain on her hands and dripped on the desk and paper. And just like before, we get the now all too familiar shot of Fujino's slumped over back. Even though there's no more stacks of sketchbooks and art books, the fire is lit within Fujino once again. And we see this fire continuing. Despite her friend's warning, she's continuing to draw at her desk in middle school, as shown by her new uniform. We even see that there might have been some truth to her classmates' warning, as she is shown being alone now, both in her class but also on the hallways. However, to our surprise, once she arrives home, Kyomoto is in her room, slumped over a new table. Seeing this, Fujino exclaims, "You're still here? Wait, you finished those backgrounds?" From just this, we are told a lot about what's happened while we weren't looking. Fujino and Kyomoto are now friends, and they're working on a manga together. We can assume as much as there's now a new table in Fujino's room, probably specifically for Kyomoto. By Fujino not being shocked at Kyomoto being there shows she's let her in herself, and the fact she's still there means she's probably slept over and worked on the comic while Fujino was in school. Heck, if you pay attention, you can see there's 2 sets of blankets and something under the top blanket on Fujino's bed, probably being a futon for Kyomoto. We then see the same montage we've grown familiar with of Fujino slumped over back, working through the seasons. But this time, Kyomoto is right there behind her. The room also evolves like before. Now much more so than before, with way more pieces hanging on the desk and windows and even hanging from wires suspended across the room. However, suddenly, the room is cleaned up. There's no longer a myriad of pages, and Fujino and Kyomoto are also curiously absent. We then see how they're at Shueisha. Shueisha is a very real publishing company in Japan, publishing various magazines that has featured some of the biggest classics in the world of manga. The fact it's specifically Shueisha and not a made-up company helps ground the comic way more in reality. It turns out that Kyomoto and Fujino are here to hand over their comic to Shueisha and are talking with an employee at the company. He compliments the 2 of them for their work, and we see Fujino's growth as she's humble and downplays their accomplishment while highlighting that Kyomoto made all the backgrounds. This is worlds apart from when we first saw Fujino. Before, she would brag that she could finish a comic in only 5 minutes, while now she will actively say that it took the 2 of them an entire year to finish the company. This is probably something that's gonna hurt your chances for publication later, as you're expected to churn out pages quickly, but Fujino is much more interested in being humble now. Another thing to pay attention to is the difference between Kyomoto and Fujino. It's become evident that Kyomoto is very much an introvert and seems to be feeling sick with nerves, while Fujino as an extrovert seems relaxed and casual in front of the guy. It's a fun detail that the foreground artist is happy being in the foreground, while the background artist would rather fade into the background. Finally, on a snowy evening, Fujino and Kyomoto hand in hand brave the weather to make their way to the local gas station. Here, they find a Jump magazine and find that their submitted comic, Metal Parade, had won the runner-up prize of the contest, earning them 1 million yen, which is a little under $6,500. We also see that the 2 are using a combined pen name, combining the 2 names to Kyo Fujino. The 2 decide to head out and spend their hard-won money for a day out in town. Kyomoto, obviously being tentative about the prospect, asks if it would not be better to save the money, but Fujino answers that the 2 of them are gonna keep drawing more manga and rake in more money. After their day out on the train home, Kyomoto opens up, saying she is glad she got out of her room and attributes this triumph to Fujino, making her leave her room. This becomes important later. What then follows is yet another montage of the 2 drawing. We see how they draw inspiration from the world around them. They head to the beach and make a comic about the sea cities. They find a cicada and decide to make a horror comic around that. They travel, they hang out, and keep making comics about their experiences. And during all of this, we also see Kyomoto picking up an art book about backgrounds that seems to blow her away. We then see how the 2 are offered a serialization deal and told that the 2 are now 17 years old, telling us that the 2 have drawn comics together for 4 years, managing to publish no short of 7 one-shots in that time. However, the time that the 2 should be celebrating, Fujino turns to Kyomoto, who seems hard-pressed about it all, and on the way home, we find out why. The reason we saw Kyomoto looking in the art book before was to establish that as good as the 2 were doing with their comics, Kyomoto wants to improve beyond that, and does she want to start art school? Unfortunately, this means she can't work on the serialized comic. Fujino tries to hand-wave it away, but that approach doesn't sit right with her. So instead, she tries to bargain, stating how there's no job prospects for art degrees and that Kyomoto will have to talk to strangers a lot, preying on Kyomoto's fear, but still, Kyomoto insists that this is what she wants to do. Fujino continues to bargain with Kyomoto, saying that as long as she follows Fujino, everything will just fall into place. But Kyomoto wants to stop relying on Fujino and learn to be independent. Angered, Fujino bombards Kyomoto with all the negatives about the decision and the challenges that will come with it. But, crying, Kyomoto simply responds with a single phrase. I want to become a better artist.
If you have a headache, most people would think that it's your brain that hurts. Or the easy days. But I don't know. You see, the doctor responds that the punitive is based on what he does. So you're going to get some ill pulling out of his bank account. And I'm going to grant you for your lost pain suffering $100,000. Okay? It's going to come out of your heart. It's like, what did I do? It was Walter. Say another word. Walter Leon, you are a disgrace to the city. You are a disgrace to the Wayne Police Department. And I am so incredibly disgusted right now. You have no idea. I will be making sure that your affairs know about what happened to you today. You know, I'm pretty sure they already know about that videotape. I'm quite sure that they already know about that.
Time has passed. We immediately recognize Fujino by her characteristic slumped over look. This is a type of framing we've come to connect with Fujino working hard on art. The small window in front of her is now so broad it spans the entire frame. Where she before was in her room, this is very obviously an office, with nothing there except stuff relating to manga and its creation. Her sketchbook has been replaced with a drawing tablet and a monitor, and her chair has been replaced by an exercise ball that is said to be the best for people who sit still for extended periods of time to not suffer any injuries. Fujino has gone all in on manga professionally, and the view from her window shows that it's not going too badly, with her now being surrounded by high-rise buildings and other offices, indicating she's probably moved to Tokyo or something. We get another montage of pictures of Fujino's familiar frame as the light changes and her pose does as well. But that's it. Besides a few notes on the table, nothing else changes. A thing we've come to expect when seeing this pattern of Fujino slumped over in a sequence of frames. The comic is thus breaking the rule to make something blatantly clear for us, that there are no changes. This is the monotone, boring life that Fujino now lives. As her comic gets more and more volumes, all still offered under hers and Kyomoto's shared pen name, and an anime is being announced, everything stays the same. Fujino just remains sitting on that exercise ball and draws with no change whatsoever. There's something I like to speculate about, which is that after volume 11, the sales started stagnating a little, as Fujino has a single copy of every volume except for volume 11, of which she has no less than 10, perhaps to kick up the sales numbers a little herself. If that is the case, it just helps to show that at this point it's a job more than a passion for her. It could also just be because part 1 of Chainsaw Man ended at volume 11 and Look Back was created during the hiatus before Fujimoto worked on part 2. But then, come January 10, 2016, something happens. We see Fujino at her usual position, little to no change whatsoever. The camera pans slightly to the right, to now show the monitor, showing that Fujino's interest has expanded from the drawing tablet to the monitor. Whatever is broadcasted on the monitor is enough to break Fujino out of her monotone cycle she's found herself in, and her face is that of utter dread. It's also worth noting that the detail on her face, with the shading and lighting, is reflective of Fujimoto's art style, hinting at the fact that whatever she witnessed is related to her. On the screen is a news broadcast about a man wielding an axe attacking an art school in Yamagata. Fujino grabs her phone and calls Fujimoto, but doesn't get an answer. However, she immediately afterwards gets a call from her mother. What she hears, we know disturbs her to her core. Even though Fujimoto's art style is known for being rough and gritty, he for the most part keeps his shading within the lines. But as we can see Fujino getting told what happened from her mom, we see the shading drastically escaping from the line art. There's no longer any control, no order, only dread. We see a flashback of a young Fujino and young Fujimoto talking out in the snow as they talk about how if they ever were to make a manga series, they'd want it to have super awesome art. Fujimoto seems to worry, however, that her slow drawing speed would get in the way of this, to which Fujino hand waves it away by saying that if she just improves her art skills, her speed will increase as well, and Fujino is already planning on improving her skills herself. This seems to strike a chord with Fujimoto, and she smiles, saying that in that case, she'll get better at drawing too, just like Fujino, and Fujino encourages her to do so, saying that Fujimoto should keep her eyes on Fujino's back and she'll grow too. This is a very Japanese way of saying that Fujino will make sure Fujimoto's skill grow as long as she follows her. We are snapped back from the flashback to the present as Fujino's phone lands on the ground, and we are left to stare up at her from her telephone, seeing the devastated look on her face. What follows are a bunch of news broadcasts and articles describing the incident. An axe-wielding murderer had broken into the Yamagata art school and killed 12 people and injured 3. There's also a quote we can only assume is from the murderer saying, "I heard voices from the paintings put up across campus hurling insults at me," clearly indicating that the murderer in question was a deranged individual. We also see that Shark Kick, Fujino's comic, has been put on hold, stating that it comes as a result of sickness. And then, we finally see what we had all feared up to this point. A wake for Fujimoto, one of the 12 victims of the Yamagata Art School massacre. This is where I want to switch gears a little bit. When I first read this, I was honestly disappointed. An axe killer? Really? Everything thus far had been so grounded, so realistic, and now all of a sudden there's a deranged mass murderer? This simply defied belief and felt too much out there for shock value. Nothing like this would ever happen in the real world. Right?
A deadly arson attack at an animation studio in Japan has proven devastating. At least 33 people are feared dead and dozens more were injured in the attack. Rescue operations are still ongoing.
A man was reportedly seen spraying gasoline around the building before it was quickly engulfed by flames.
In 2019, on July the 18th, a deranged man called Shinji Aoba set fire to one of Japan's most acclaimed anime studios, Kyoto Animation. The studio was known for titles such as K-On!, Clannad, and The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. In the year prior to the attack, the studio had received over 200 death threats, but because they were all sent anonymously, no one could connect them to any one culprit. Around 10:30 in the noon of July the 18th, Shinji Aoba walked into the studio with 40 liters of gasoline. The culprit is said to have doused the place in gasoline and even poured some over individuals before setting the gasoline alight, causing an explosion and setting himself on fire in the process, all while screaming, "Die."
We found 2 people on the ground floor, 11 on the second floor, 22 on the staircase from the 3rd floor to the roof.
This is so outrageous, hearing this was caused by arson, regardless what the motivation could have been. I feel anger towards the suspect.
The suspect was injured in the fire and is now in hospital. It's not clear what his motive was, but one witness overheard him complaining that the studio had stolen his work.
He seemed to be in pain, irritated and suffering, but also angry as if he was resentful. I heard him saying something like, "You copied it."
Shinji Aoba fled the scene of the crime shortly after, but was apprehended by police, who found multiple unused knives lying close to the scene. The attack destroyed most of Kyoto Animation's material and computers, and the attack was reported to be one of the deadliest massacres in Japan's history since World War II, with 36 of the 70 employees reported dead. As Shinji Aoba was transported to the hospital to treat his burns, he admitted to having started the fire for revenge, accusing the studio of plagiarizing his novels. When questioned, Shinji Aoba came up with 3 instances where he believed his work was plagiarized. In his novel, there was a scene in which banners appear, which he claimed the manga Free plagiarized by having a banner reading "Swimming Club advances to regional tournament blowing in the wind." In his novel, there's also a scene where the heroine buys food from a deli at a 50% discount, which he claimed the anime Tsurune stole when a character buys food in a shopping mart and gets a 20% discount. And lastly, in Aoba's novel, there's a scene where a schoolboy is threatened by his teacher and told that he'll repeat his grade if he continues acting like he is, and he claims the anime K-On! Stole this idea when a character says to a junior that they repeated a grade. Safe to say, Shinji Aoba's testimony does not line up with the real world, and the company president of Kyoto Animation, Hideaki Hata, would even go as far as to state that they had received a draft novel from Aoba from a writing contest, but it had not passed the first stage assessment and had been forgotten. On the 25th of January 2024, Aoba was sentenced to death. It is my belief that the Yamagata Art School massacre serves as an allegory of the Kyoto Animation arson attack. While the dates don't match up and the locales are different, possibly to distance it enough from the real thing to remain respectful to the victims and survivors of the Kyoto Animation arson attack, enough lines up that I think it is not unreasonable to make the connection. Both were sudden unprecedented attacks on locations celebrating art. The attacker was clearly deranged, and as we'll come to realize later, both attackers claimed that the institution in question had plagiarized their work. It's also curious that Look Back was published on July 19, 2021, almost exactly 2 years to the day after the attack on Kyoto Animation, which took place July 18, 2019. And this is no doubt an event that shocked the Japanese public. After the attack, a measure was passed in the national diet to allow for donations to the studio to be tax exempt, which is a first in Japan's corporate history. Animation studios from all around Japan also offered their support, and video game, anime, and manga retailers also took donations at their stores to support the victims. There's no doubt that this affected Fujimoto deeply. Back in Look Back, Fujino is back in Kyomoto's house. Judging by her clothes being all black and the sky outside the windows being pitch black, we can safely assume that this is after the wake. Once more, Fujino finds herself outside Kyomoto's door, surrounded by her piles of sketchbooks. Perhaps to distract herself, Fujino picks up a copy of Shonen Jump, one of the magazines that has published her and Kyomoto's work. Inside, she finds the very same Yonkoma that she had drawn for Kyomoto back in the day, pristine and uncrumbled. Kyomoto must have cherished this strip deeply. This makes Fujino break down. She talks to herself, saying that it's her fault, that Kyomoto's death is her fault. We already saw a hint of this when she first got the phone call, where she was reminded of their talk about getting better at art for the sake of the comic. It was Fujino that had spurred her on to become better, and Kyomoto wished to do that by going to Yamagata Art School. But the impetus of it all in Fujino's mind is her bringing Kyomoto out of the safe confines of her room. If Kyomoto had never received Fujino's yonkoma, Kyomoto would never have stepped outside, never met Fujino, never started making comics, never wished to become better, never gone to Yamagata Art School, and would have thus never died. Destroyed by this thought, Fujino says drawing is completely useless and tears up the yonkoma in frustration. The frame in which he says drawing is useless is completely shaded, showing this statement comes from the deepest, darkest part of her body. She is shunning the thing that's been her life all up to this point, because it was after all what got her best friend killed. As she tears up the yonkoma, the top part of it falls down and, just like in the past, slips under the door into Kyomoto's room. That is when we switch to inside Kyomoto's room for the first time, and we surprisingly see a very much alive Kyomoto. This is also where we see Fujimoto's genius at work. Everything prior to this, since the wake, has been in dark, brooding colors. The shading all rough sketches, and the background is minimal and crude at best. But inside Kyomoto's room, everything is the exact opposite. We can truly appreciate how the art has portrayed Fujino's frustration and sadness when comparing it to Kyomoto. Here, everything is bright. Every line stroke is clean and sharp, and the background is detailed to a ludicrous extreme. Fitting for the background artist after all. Kyomoto notices the piece of the yonkoma and picks it up. Coincidentally, it is the part of the comic that tells her not to come out. Her questions about its appearance is interrupted by the ringing of the doorbell, and we then see the young Fujino saying she's leaving the graduation certificate at the door. But that can't be right. That never happened. And that's right. This never happened. It's important to remember, Fujino is a manga author. She makes a living off of making stories. And just like I can imagine any creative person has done when facing terrible opposition, she's made up a scenario in her head where she never met Kyomoto, a world where Kyomoto was encouraged to stay inside, and a world where Kyomoto would survive. And sure enough, Kyomoto never meets Fujino and simply returns to her room to draw. But this is Kyomoto after all. We know she would continue to draw. She was so passionate about it after all. So she takes Fujino's characteristic pose and draws, filling up the room with piles of sketchbooks. And because of this love for art, she of course also falls in love with wanting to get better. And she gets that book about backgrounds, and she applies for Yamagata Art School, and of course she passes and gets accepted, and she improves, and then January 10, 2016 happens. Inside, we see Kyomoto painting. Once more, it's impossible not to see Fujimoto in this piece, as the painting she's working on is a one-to-one recreation of a scene in Chainsaw Man. It should also be noted that, from what I could find, Fujimoto attended and graduated from the exact same school and program as Kyomoto. Taking a break from her painting, she sits down on a sofa on the second floor. Here we see something the comic hasn't had at all up to this point. Exposition text. A student sat down on a sofa on the second floor of the building for Western-style painting program for a break. The student heard a metallic knocking sound from the stairs. At this time, there was no other students near the sofa. 11:19 a.m. A man entered the building from the outer stairs and approached a resting student. The man was holding a pointed tool he had found in the art practice building. When one first reads this, one might be inclined to believe that this is a report on the events that happened during the attack. But there's important key points that disproves this to be the case. First of all, the attacker would be named as the culprit or the suspect. Kyomoto would also not be referred to as a resting student, but the victim. There are also things that a report would not know, such as why Kyomoto was relaxing on the sofa and that she was alone. This is not a report, this is a story script. As the man enters the school, we see that he's both incredibly detailed, but also strangely not. There's never any clear visual of his appearance. Something is always obscured by shading or lighting, or it's just simply not in frame. After all, Fujino doesn't know the face of the attacker. As he attacks Fujino, he screams, "Listen to me, they're wrong! It's mine, isn't it? It was my idea first! You plagiarized my art, didn't you?" Mimicking the insane accusations Aoba Shinji had made. But before the culprit can kill Kyomoto, Fujino appears with an almost comedically perfect karate jump kick bathed in a white light like a true storybook savior. After knocking the culprit out, we move outside the school where Fujino is being carried into an ambulance. She gives a statement to a policeman saying that she does karate in the next town over, and while out running, she saw the culprit entering the school with a weapon, and that's when she took action. Again, this is too perfect a story. There's no way she would know that the culprit was dangerous. Heck, Kyomoto didn't even know this when she first saw him. This is all a story in Fujino's head, to imagine the life Kyomoto would have lived had Fujino not prompted her to exit the room. But even in her own made-up story, the two cannot help but meet. And Kyomoto asks Fujino for her number so she can probably express her gratitude for Fujino saving her. When getting her info and finding out Fujino's name, she immediately recognizes Fujino as the girl who drew comics for the grade school paper. As the ambulance is about to leave, Kyomoto asks one last question. "Why did you stop drawing manga?" And Fujino responds, "Actually, I recently picked it up again. Be my assistant when I get serialized." Even in Fujino's own escapist fantasy, she cannot imagine a world where the two didn't meet and didn't start making comics together. When Kyomoto returns home, she picks up a binder showing she's kept all of Fujino's old strips. We know it's hers as it features the very first one we saw her draw. Finding a blank yonkoma tucked in between the pages, she can't help but smile and goes to draw a strip of her own. But the wind blows the paper out of her hand, sending it sliding under the door back to Fujino, crumbled down in the hallway in the dark. The yonkoma wakes her up from her daydream. On the yonkoma is a comic strip titled "Look Back" by Kyomoto. The strip depicts a young girl getting attacked by a man with a pickaxe, who's then attacked by Fujino, who is here to save the day, only to reveal that she got the pickaxe stuck in her back. This strip is obviously almost exactly the same scenario that Fujino had dreamt up in her head, and the coincidence is enough to finally spur her on to open the door into Kyomoto's room. Despite the room being dark, we see Fujino's face lit up with a bright light, not because of any physical light, but because of the revelations within. On the open window, you can see the point where Kyomoto's yonkoma used to hang. There's no reason why Kyomoto's window should be open, as she's probably not been home for a while. Her shelves are stacked with multiple volumes of Shark Kick, the comic Fujino had been working on under their mutual pen name. It's very obvious, looking at the title and cover of the comic, that the comic is a reference to Fujimoto's previous works, Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man. But Kyomoto's not just bought one copy, she's bought multiple copies. On her desk is even a Shonen Jump reader survey. Kyomoto was a fan and a supporter of Fujino's work all the way to the end. And then finally, for the first time in the comic, a character for real turns to look behind her, and it's given plenty of deserved gravitas with a full page dedicated to the act. Fujino looks back behind her to see where it all began. Her crude autograph on Kyomoto's shirt, still hanging prominently on the door to her room after all these years. Seeing this, Fujino thinks back to a conversation she's had with Kyomoto. In it, she comments how, to begin with, she didn't even really like drawing manga. She didn't find it fun, it's not exactly glamorous, and the entire process is a hassle. So much work goes into it, and even after all of that, you're still nowhere near finished. She's then asked, why does she draw? And as if answering, we get a montage of Kyomoto and Fujino working on their first draft of Metal Parade. No words are spoken yet again, because you don't need to hear what they're saying. This moment is all about the feeling of pitching ideas together, of working together, spending time together, sharing this experience of creation together with your friend. When the flashback ends, we find Fujino crying as she reads volume 11 of Shock Kick in Kyomoto's room. The shading on the page shows that multiple tears have landed on and soaked through the page, indicating she's been staring at this last page for a while. Despite being the same dark room as before, the shading is much brighter and not as crude. Once more, we see Fujino's back as she faces the signed shirt, and we know what this means. We have been primed to know what it means ever since the beginning. Fujino is in work mode. She walks home, and in her office, we see her tape something to the big window before getting back to work. And in the last frame, on the last page, we see the all too familiar sight of Fujino back at work, this time with a yonkoma hanging on the window in front of her. Why do we make art? Why do we keep making art? Why do we make comics? Why do we tell stories? Fujimoto asked this question both directly and indirectly with Look Back. Time and time again, it's brought up how the pursuit of art is a lonely experience. Almost every time we see Fujino draw, it's her slumped over alone. Very little changes, and what changes the most is the world around her. And no matter how hard she works on it, there's always someone better than her. Kyomoto is a shut-in truant, and her only escape from this lonely boredom was art as well. Even when you reach what some people claim is the pinnacle of creating art, you still sat there, slumped over a desk, working night and day, hours on end, and the finish line never seems to get any closer. So why do we make art? Why do we keep making art? The name of the comic is Look Back, and it's called that for a reason. While you can argue that the name comes from the Oasis song Don't Look Back in Anger, I think there's more to it. In the comic, the words "look back" is ever said only once, and it's in Kyomoto's comic about Fujino saving Kyomoto. In the comic, the title "Look Back" is Kyomoto imploring Fujino to look back so she can see that she's been stabbed with the pickaxe. Thus, the name "Look Back" is the comic imploring you to look back. When Fujino is at her lowest, having discarded art and drawing completely, we see the only instance of the paranormal take place, which is the yonkoma appearing depicting the exact scenario Fujino had dreamt up. As stated before, there's no reason for Kyomoto's window to be left open, and it's damn near impossible to have depicted the exact image Fujino had in her mind prior to her death. This to me screams that Kyomoto's spirit is asking Fujino to look back, both physically so she can spot the signed shirt, but also metaphorically. Look back at what you have created, what you have accomplished, what you have experienced. That is why this prompts Fujino's flashback to the discussion she's had as to why she draws, and even hints as to why she returns to her office to continue drawing. It's because of her memories with Kyomoto, the shared experience of creating something, that undefinable feeling of coming together with someone to create something, sharing a passion with someone equally as infatuated with a thing as you are. That is also why the yonkoma is such a prominent theme throughout the comic. A yonkoma was where it all started and is typically where most manga artists find their beginning. The comic, in other words, is a cry to everyone out there who's doing art of their own. Look back. Look at how far you have come. If you keep looking ahead, everything might seem meaningless. There's always someone better than you after all. But if you look back, you will see that you have outgrown the person you used to be. It may not be much, but it will be there. Fujino's struggle with art is one that mimics that of almost every creator out there. The struggles and hardships of feeling you're not moving the needle, of friends you shared your passion with parting ways, and the long hours you can spend on just creating something that you're just gonna cast out into the wide ocean of the internet, hoping someone will spot it and applaud it. But every time she's giving up, all she has to do is look back. Look back at Kyomoto, whose hand she's holding. Look back at the great times they had together. Look at the physical back of Kyomoto's shirt she asked her to sign because she, the one Fujino thought was so superior to her, was a fan of her because of her consistency and speed. Kyomoto respected and adored Fujino, not because of how pretty her pictures were, but because of her persistence and speed, which is a skill in and of itself. And we see just how big this was for her, being unable to contain the excitement as she's literally dancing all the way home through the rain, getting right back to making art without drying herself off, as if she never stopped in the first place. Creating art is a thankless experience. It's a lonely experience. It's a frustrating experience. Some idiot can just punch in some prompts on a machine trained on someone else's art and conjure up a piece that gets a ton of likes. Meanwhile, you're over here pouring blood, sweat, and tears into your work. Someone's comic that is the most by-the-numbers stale piece you've ever seen can win awards, while you're out here slaving away at drawing intricate details that are there for a reason rather than just fluff. When we return triumphantly from being mentally knocked down, there's also no big fanfare where you're just nailing the art perfectly in your first go. It's just returning to your slumped over pose, retracing the line of a curve an infinite amount of times until it's finally right. So why do we do it? Why does Fujino return to work after Kyomoto's death? The same reason Fujino cannot help but draw the yonkoma outside Kyomoto's room without thinking about it. The same reason mountain climbers scale the mountains. 'Cause it's there, and we simply can't help it. When looking at where we are now, it will rarely be where we want to be, and Fujimoto implores us, heck, might even be begging us, to please look back and see how far we have come. Look back on all the joy we have had creating. Look back to your first commission, the first time your parents hung your drawing up on the fridge, the first time your work was printed, the first friend you made through you simply pursuing your goal. There is no one true way to encapsulate this feeling, but Look Back tries to capture both this elusive feeling as well as the good and uncomfortably realistic bads there is in creating art. If you ever feel like you're in a rut, I implore you, go read or watch Look Back. and please draw. Please draw. And whenever you feel that spark leave you, look back.